Great. Thank you so much, and welcome back for those of you who've been able to join us for weeks 1 and 2. This is week 3 of the program. I do want to remind everyone each week is meant to be its own kind of self-contained piece. We understand if you may not be able to make a class or two along the way, and we hope that you can join us for as many as you can, because in each one we're going to have some overlapping lessons and skills, but some unique pieces that will be different each week. We were grateful last week to have a guest chef, Pablo, who was on, and I am counting on next week having another guest chef, Chef Modu, for the West African class. But this week, we are focusing on Indian food and food from the Indian subcontinent. So by that, I mean food from Bangladesh, Pakistan, India, Sri Lanka. And what we know in the United States is Indian American food, right? Much like we know Chinese American food, but some restaurants being more authentic than others. What we need to keep in mind is that India is the second most populous nation on earth. It has, I believe, roughly a billion people. And it also has many unique states, each with their own regional cuisine. So what we're doing here, what we're representing is Indian food that you might find in the States in a vegetarian version. These are both vegetarian recipes we're working through today. But something like the flatbread naan that we'll be making is found in many parts of India. So it's found in many different regions. Some of the other things that vary between regions of India are the ingredients used, the amount of spice, the heat. Generally, the regions closer to the equator have a higher spice level, since that food is actually cooling in nature. If you eat that spicy food, it will cool you off. So traditionally, that has spicier. Even here in the States, if you do eat Indian food out, you could typically order it mild, medium, hot, or Indian hot, as some places call it. And that really just depends on the amount of chilies, the strength of those chilies, and then the amount of spice used. So there's a whole world of Indian cuisine. It's one of the world's great cuisines, has long historical underpinnings. And today's nutrition piece focuses on the Ayurvedic cuisine, or what's known as Ayurvedic cuisine. So if you could, Jessica, move to the overhead board. I have a few of the herbs and spices that we're going to be using today, and we're going to talk about those in connection with the Ayurvedic cuisine. So when we say Ayurvedic, what we mean is it's really a system or a harmonious balance of foods that's meant to promote optimal health. So including improved digestion, reduced inflammation, clarifying to the skin and to the appearance, and strengthening to the immune system. So that traditional holistic medicine practice of India, which is 5,000 years old plus, includes a whole sense of foods that are cooling foods and warm foods, and there's a lot to it, but I just wanted to introduce the concept here. Most of the spices especially are anti-inflammatory. So some of those spices include things like turmeric, cumin, coriander, which is really, coriander is derived from the seeds from the cilantro plant, what we know as fresh cilantro. The coriander is the seeds of that plant ground up. Fennel, black pepper, and then ginger and garlic, which we've already been using and talking about a bit in class. So just to show a few of the spices that we'll be working with today here on the platform. This is turmeric, which is the very bright yellow color is the color it will bring to the dish. It's so bright it'll stain your countertops, and it's known as a very powerful anti-inflammatory agent, functioning kind of like an ibuprofen or like other things in your butt and medicines that are caused to reduce inflammation. This is a natural version. This is a black mustard seed. So you can find black mustard seed or yellow mustard seed or brown mustard seed at the store. If you don't have access to the black mustard seed, or you can't find it or can't get a hold of it, you could just use a teaspoon or a small amount of regular mustard, which will provide that same kind of mustardy spice and kick. We're going to toast those seeds, so it'll bring out like a fragrant flavor today. These are cumin seeds. Cumin, you could also use cumin ground, but these are the fresh seeds. So we're also going to be toasting these and cooking them on the stove, and they're just going to create like a really nice fragrance to the dish, that toasted cumin flavor. This is the ground coriander that I mentioned, almost like a fruity, lemony type flavor. And then this is a red garam masala. Garam masala just means spice mix, but this is on the spicier side. It's a deep red. And this is what we're using in the recipe. It says Kashmiri or mild red chili powder. We're using this garam masala. So those are the 5 that we're going to be using today. Along with, from the spicier side, we're going to be using these serrano peppers. Again, the recipe calls for green chilies. You could use jalapenos, serranos, Thai green chilies, any type of chili, just depending on how hot you want it. So, and then we have, of course, our garlic and ginger. So that's kind of that introduction to Ayurvedic cooking. And we're going to stay on the board because we are going to actually start with the naan. So this is the first time we have cooked a bread of any type, and we're cooking a flatbread today called naan, which you may have had, may be familiar with, maybe you've made at home or at least had in a restaurant. So really delicious flatbread that's both leavened with yeast and baking powder. So I'm going to bring that to the board and show you the basic preparation on that. So again, this is our first baking preparation, but don't be intimidated. This is one of the more simple breads that one could make. I'll show you, I'll break down the different ingredients and you'll see how quickly it can come together once you have everything measured out. So we have the 4 cups of flour, all-purpose flour here in the bowl. We have, I'll be adding some oil, and then we have 4 tablespoons whole milk yogurt, 1 packet of active dry yeast, 2 teaspoons of sugar, 2 teaspoons of salt, and then 1 teaspoon of baking powder. So this is a little unusual in that it has both baking powder and yeast. Some recipes only have one or the other, but those things are going to combine to when we cook it in a short while, you're going to see how it quickly kind of puffs up and finds a lot of aeration, and it's a very light dough when made correctly. So I'll just walk through the recipe here. This, if you baked anything, biscuits, drop biscuits, anything kind of quick dough, you're just going to make a well in the center just to help more easily incorporate the ingredients. I'll add 2 tablespoons of oil. I'm going to eyeball that one right now. We're going to add the yogurt, whole milk yogurt, just any type of plain yogurt would work. The whole milk just adds a little more fat and flavor to this, and it's also going to make the bread a little softer. We'll add baking powder, sugar, salt. The sugar is there to kind of kickstart the yeast, and it's going to really pump up the yeast and get it activated. Because this dish, we're making this about at least 60 to 90 minutes ahead of time. I'll show you in a moment. I've prepared the dough in advance, but to give these yeast a chance to work, you're going to start at about 90 minutes before you're ready to cook and serve them. So then you're just going to use it one hand, just kind of pinch, roll it around. The way it describes it in the recipe is use your fingers to combine the ingredients until they resemble crumbs. Again, almost sort of like a biscuit dough before you add the liquid. You do want to make sure that it's evenly mixed, especially the yeast and the sugar, so that all this stuff can get kind of activated. I feel good about this. It's kind of like a coarse, it's almost like pebbly, kind of soft pebbles in nature. It feels pretty evenly mixed. And now we're going to make a well again. And I have heated 1 cup of whole milk. I heated 1 cup for maybe 45, 50 seconds in the microwave. You don't want it like simmering or boiling. You just want it warm to the touch to properly activate that yeast. Now is where we really get into the mixing. I'm going to keep it in the bowl just because I'm not going to dirty another surface, but you could also, as the recipe suggests, turn it out on a cutting board if you'd like. But now we're going to get in here with 2 hands and actually start kneading the dough. You can see it's starting to come together. It's going to feel a little dry at first as you pick up the rest of that flour, but once you start kneading, it'll come together and you'll see because it'll start to clear away the elements from the edge of the bowl. It'll almost like clean the bowl of sorts. And you are going to knead this for 5 full minutes, which I did for my other batch. Seems like a long time, but you're also just fully incorporating the dough. You're stretching it out, you're softening it. So this is an important step. This is a great job to turn over to a child of yours, perhaps a child or a teenager with nothing to do in the summer. They could knead this for 5 minutes and then report back. So as you can see, it's now come together. It's starting to have a little bit of solidity to it, but yet slightly soft, a little bit shaggy. So thanks to the magic of virtual television, I'm going to remove this and I'll take out the dough that's been sitting. So voila. So this dough has been sitting for approximately 70 minutes, a little over an hour, but it has almost doubled in volume, which is what it asks for. You slightly oil the bowl just so it separates easily. It has a nice light feel to it. I'm just going to knead it once or twice just to kind of bring it together. And then at this point, I will turn it onto the board and I'll roll out a couple. And we'll see how this part looks. I'm just going to add a touch of flour to the board. And what I like to do is put it into a shape, roughly rectangular shape, something like this. And then it's saying in the recipe, we're going to cut it into roughly 12 pieces. So this is where I'll pull out the knife and I'll just go across 2 cuts. 2, 3. Now, some of these are going to be bigger than others, but I'm not too worried about it. They're all just going to cook up in the pan. It's more important that we get them to about the same thickness so that they take about the same amount of time to cook. So you can start flattening with your hand and then use a rolling pin or the long handle of a spoon, whatever you have. Just a small pin works well. And it's in the recipe, it says roll out to 5 by 8 inches. I'm going to try and go roughly for that. The shape doesn't particularly matter. It's more the thickness that we're going for. All right, so I like that. I feel good about that. The thickness is, gosh, I don't know how you describe that. Maybe like a little thicker than a quarter, something like that. And then I'm going to set this aside. I'll roll out one more just for the demo here. Now in India, these would then be put and thrown against the side of a tandoor oven, which is like a very hot clay oven with walls. And they would just take these and throw them against the side of the oven. They stick, they cook in a matter of seconds, like 10, 15, 20 seconds they'll cook because the heat of the ovens is so hot. We're going to just do ours in a skillet on the stove because I imagine most of you don't have a clay tandoor oven at home, but that would be the traditional method, which is what gives them kind of like a nice crispy blackened outside. Oh, there you go. Again, no cracks. You can tell the dough is good moisture. There's no cracks in it. About the same thickness as the other. I'm going to set that aside too. So there is your naan dough. So again, it takes time to sit and rest, but the initial process of mixing, it's that 5 minutes of knead time, which is a bit of a chore. But then once you get to this phase, you just roll it out and cook it. So we'll get to the final cooking part at the end here. I want to pause and just take a minute to see if there's any questions on the Ayurvedic discussion or on the naan piece. Are we good?
Yeah, there's no questions that have come in, but just as a reminder, there's that Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen where you can add any questions, as well as the chat feature, and we will share those questions throughout the demo if you have them.
Okay, so we're going to move on to the two main recipes. We're cooking two recipes today. I mean, I would say if you did this at home, you may only want to just pick one of the two. We just wanted to throw in the mix and kind of show you a couple different things. But we're going to do these two, and then both go really well over rice, served over rice, and with that naan bread. So that's how I would suggest serving each. So I am cooking some basmati rice in the rice cooker as we go here. So, okay, so the thing about the vegetable korma and the dal recipe is they both share some certain ingredients in common. So we're going to be prepping a couple things together that are going to be used in both. And then we'll go to the stove and we'll work on the kind of combining process and put them both together. So those things include some of the common ingredients include ginger, include garlic, onion, and then a couple of the spices also overlap. Let me talk about the ingredients that are going in the vegetable korma. One of the really cool things about the korma is that you can use whatever vegetables you like. You really can. The recipe, as printed or as we sent out, says you could use like a mixed vegetable mix from the freezer. You could use, today we're going to be using cauliflower, green beans, tomatoes. You could really do any sort of vegetable mix that you like or even that you have in your fridge. So I think it's definitely one of those recipes you can look in your vegetable drawer and just go, okay, I got a mix of vegetables. Not quite sure what to do with them. Let me try this korma recipe. So I'm going to get back to preparing those in a minute, but we are working with a few ingredients today that we haven't worked with before. So I just want to take a second to introduce those. This is ghee. So this is the clarified butter. So it's basically a butter that's used a ton in India as a primary cooking oil. And the dairy solids have been removed. So as anyone knows, if you've ever tried to make butter for eggs or butter for something on your stove, it's very easy to burn. This is different because it has a very high smoke point. A lot of the milk solids have been taken out. So you could use this more like a canola or a vegetable oil. So this is a purified butter that's used a lot in Indian cooking. We are going to be using cashew butter as a thickener. So again, in terms of recipes and ingredients, we always want to offer alternatives. You could also use, in place of this, any type of nut butter, tahini, peanut butter, almond butter, any type of nut butter. And if you don't have access or can't find the cashew butter, you could also take some cashews, whole cashews, if you have these, and then you could blend them with a bit of water and mix them in a blender and make sort of a version of like a smooth cashew butter. So there's always options. There's always alternative options for things. But what this is going to do is add to our korma like a certain like body and a certain depth of flavor and a thickness that's really, really delicious. So that'll be another ingredient today. And then on the dal recipes, it doesn't specify, it says urud dal, which is a kind of difficult to find lentil type in the recipe. So what we can use is really any type of lentil. These are probably the two most common that are found, which is a brown lentil and a red lentil. You could absolutely use either of these. And today we're going to use the red. I like the red. It's a little more delicate and it cooks faster. So I really like the flavor and the texture of the red. It also has a really like a pretty pink look when it cooks up. So that's some of the stuff we're going to be using today. I'm gonna start prepping a few things here. We've got kind of our powerful flavor and health combination of garlic and onion and ginger today. When I showed you ginger before, we went through a certain way of cutting the ginger that was, cutting it, peeling with a spoon and then cutting it into small pieces, very small mince, which is totally fine. This recipe I noticed calls for actually grating the ginger. So I was just going to show you that process today just as an alternative. So as I had shown in a previous class, one easy way to peel ginger is just by using the side of a spoon, almost like in place of a peeler, since it takes off a little bit less of the root, and it also Helps you kind of get in the nooks and crannies. So we're going to peel this piece. Again, ginger is a somewhat controversial ingredient in that some people really like it, some people just don't have a taste for it. But sometimes I think people who've had a bad experience with ginger have eaten a big chunk or a big piece before. And so I think this is also a nice way to prepare it so that it's a little more blended into the dish and it's not quite so powerful as it might be if it was in pieces or chunks. So there's our ginger root. And I'll just use the side of a box grater or a microplane or any type of grater that you may have, whatever the finest setting is. As you can see, it smashes up pretty well. The other nice thing about this is it takes away the fibrousness, the fibers of the ginger. They don't really, it kind of breaks them down. So you don't have that fibrousness that might like stick in your teeth or kind of be hard to eat. To protect my hand, I'm just gonna flatten it out. As you can see, there's quite a lot of ginger juice just coming out the bottom too. All good stuff. Ginger being one of the healthiest things you can eat for your digestion. Again, anti-inflammatory. It's sort of the reason digestive health. The reason people say to drink ginger ale while you're sick is really the ginger root is what has that element in a stronger way to aid digestive health.
And Stephen, we did have a question about the lentils.
Yep.
Is there a flavor difference between the red and the brown lentils?
Yes, I would say that the brown has a little bit more like I would call an earthy taste, almost like a mineral or earthy. Whereas the red, I think, is just a little more delicate and doesn't have quite as many of those earthy undertones. Tasting more of the bean and less of the earthiness. All right, so there is our ginger. The recipe also says to grate the garlic, but I don't see a ton of point in grating the garlic. And I think it's also really difficult and a little bit dangerous to grate garlic. So, I mean, if you have a little garlic press where you kind of smash it, it's really just saying try and get it like as small as possible or pretty heavily minced. So that's what the takeaway is. We're just going to cut up these onions real quick, which we prepared as we have in the past couple of weeks. We've kept the root end on. And so we're just going to cut these up quite small. We're going to be using these in both recipes as well, so we'll just make one combined. And we're cutting in kind of a rainbow type motion around. Other fingers clawed as much as possible and just getting rid of the root. Both recipes don't specify what type of onion. They say you could use yellow or red onion, so really your choice. I like the red onion just for the look and the visual, but it's your choice, whatever onions you have. All right, so there's our onion. And then we're going to cut the spicy pepper. So, as you know, if you've tried peppers or if you like peppers, they vary in spice a lot. So even a jalapeno or a serrano 1 week from the store might have a different heat level the next week. But the main thing that's going to determine how hot the dish is whether or not we choose to include the seeds, since that's where the main heat of the pepper is kept. So if you want to have a spicier pepper, spicier dish, you could just chop them this way and include the seeds. This can cook down in the dish. If you would like a slightly less spicy version, but still the flavor of the pepper, I would suggest difficult with a smaller pepper like this, but here's the method I would use is just take a smaller knife, cut it in half again. So you end up with quarters, and then use your knife to take out the seeds, or your hand, whichever. Although some people's hands can be quite sensitive to the pepper seeds themselves. So again, always being careful and washing your hands well with soap after handling, but you can remove the seeds and then you're going to maintain a lot of the flavor, but without the same intensity of heat. And you could also go to an Indian or Thai grocery store and ask them for what type of peppers they would use if you want to kind of get very authentic. There's other peppers that they import from India, but I would just say, and from Thailand, but I would just say be very wary because sometimes those can be incredibly spicy. It only takes one or two of those and you can be like overpowered by the heat. So I think just use caution and just kind of get to know your peppers. And I'll cut these up in small strips. So I would say a dish that might be called mild or that you might be familiar with as mild may have this pepper with no seeds, something maybe a medium or medium hot. You might have a couple of peppers with the seeds. So again, this is all kind of matter of personal preference. But so all of these ingredients together are so pungent, so flavorful. And then what we're going to do is combine them with the ghee, the cooking oil, the cooking clarified butter, and the spices to provide like a huge flavor boost for the whole dish. So that's where we're going to go with that. Add those to there. All right, so as for the other vegetables that we're going to be using in the dish, we've got these green beans that I've just washed and then cut up in bite-sized pieces. We've got tomatoes that we'll be using in both dishes. We've got the cauliflower. So I'll start with the cauliflower. It's a little cleaner. And again, I'm a fan with the cauliflower of just hand breaking it up into small florets. So I would start with this side, cut it down, take out the center, some diagonal cuts. If it falls apart, that's a good thing, right? Remove any of the green leaves. And cauliflower is really nice, and it's used a lot in Indian dishes because it just absorbs the flavor of whatever flavorful sauce it's in. So it's kind of like a blank canvas type of vegetable. If you wanted to add other vegetable proteins to this dish, like tofu, tempeh, other vegetarian proteins, you absolutely could. Those would work really well too. Tofu would definitely soak up some of the flavors in the dish. If you wanted to do a chicken-based version of this, you could absolutely add chicken as well. So I'm just going to use my hands to break these up. I'm trying to turn them into quite small pieces because I want them to cook in roughly the same amount of time as the green beans. So I'm going to make them quite small. It's squeaking. That's a good sign. It's a sign of a fresh cauliflower. It's squeaking as I take it apart. But again, I really want to emphasize that you can add whatever mix of vegetables you like in this dish. If you don't like cauliflower, go with broccoli. If you don't like broccoli, go with carrots. It's really kind of any dish, any vegetables that would really work well. Even potatoes could go. Sweet potatoes could go. It's really another beautiful thing about the dish. There's our head of cauliflower. Ready to roll. I have washed this produce before serving it, so I'd recommend always washing the produce. The tomatoes, again, personal preference on size. I'm going to cut these into, I'm going to go into each half into 3 and then cut across. Almost like the size of like a diced tomato in a can, which you could totally use too. You could use a diced tomato, even a tomato sauce. You're really just trying to add a little bit of that nice tomato flavor and acidity. So I'll slow down once I'm chopping. So just straight down. lay each half down, cut each half into 3. I would call these like a large dice, like again, like the kind you'd find in a can of diced tomatoes. And you'll see, like, or you'll taste when you try this at some point, the acidity of the tomatoes works really nicely against kind of the rich, thick broth that we're putting them into. So it kind of stands out against the richness of that broth, which is thickened with the cashew butter. So again, this is going to split about half and half between the two dishes. So. All right. So we are at a point where we're actually going to go over to the stove. So just for those of you who haven't been in my home kitchen, welcome. So it's good to use like a fairly heavy bottomed saucepan. This would work. This would work. Just something big enough that you can simmer it, and with a lid. We're going to cook the korma in here and the dal in here, and then we're going to use just kind of a heavy saucepan for cooking the naan to finish it off. I'm going to put this over a medium heat. I'm going to put it medium high. For me, it's like 6 out of 10 on my stove. And we're going to add, this is that part where we're going to start to utilize and really bring out the flavors of the seasoning. So we're going to add a 1/4 cup of the ghee. And then we're adding the black mustard seeds, which will actually like pop almost like popcorn as they start to kind of roast. So you'll see and hear like a bit of a popping sound, but that's also bringing out the flavor of the seeds. See if I can show the inside of the pan a little better. I'm trying to hold this up every so often, but again, it's just about enough of the clarified butter to coat the bottom of the pan. So once we have these you'll smell it too. You'll smell, there'll be a quick change in smell as they start to roast. So on deck, as we get these to start to heat, we're using about half of the red onion because the other portion will be for the dal. We're using our fresh ginger, again, about half. And then we've got that ginger paste that we put in, and then also the green chilies. I'm not going to add all of the green chilies. You could add a portion, see how it goes, allow the broth to simmer a bit, taste it, and then decide if you want to add the rest. Totally smart move if you're not sure of the heat of the chilies. Okay, you can't hear it, but I'm starting to hear a little sputter around the seeds, and I'm starting to see a little bit of movement, like a little bit of a popping action. As soon as I hear, or as soon as you in your home kitchen hear the first couple pop, almost like waiting for popcorn, that's the time. And at that point is when we're going to add these other savory elements. So and if you don't have the black mustard seeds and you're just using a teaspoon or two of yellow mustard, I would say add that later in the process, not right now. That would be That's how I would alter the recipe, is just add that mustard to the broth once we get it simmering. All right, I'm feeling good about this. These are starting to move on me. I haven't heard of popping yet, but they're starting to move around and I'm seeing some browning, so I'm gonna go with the rest. There we go. When you add the onion, it should be a nice simmer. You should hear that sizzle. You can hear that through the magic of the internet. Just garlic. The rest is for the other dish. Up the ginger. I'm going to add about the green chilies. Let's see how that goes.
And we have a question about the chilies. So, will they get hotter as they cook?
The intensity will spread to the rest of the dish. I would say they themselves won't taste as hot. Like if you were to eat these raw, that would be hotter than when they're added to the dish, but all of their heat will dissipate and move through the dish, especially with this amount of oil, like the clarified butter that we're using in the oil. It's going to spread. So the chilies themselves may not be as hot, but they will spread that flavor throughout. So if you can see there, you can see it's that mostly onion, garlic, ginger mix, mustard seeds throughout. Really, really nice start. And we're not going to go too long there. We're just going to go, it says 5 minutes in the thing. It could be, depending on your heat level, 3 to 5 minutes until they get clear. Translucent, you might see the word translucent in a lot of recipes. It really just means kind of clear, almost see through. So we're going to go ahead with the black pepper, salt, red chili powder, and turmeric. We're using that red garam masala, so we're adding that. And the turmeric. So immediately you can see that intense yellow and orangey colors from the turmeric spread throughout the whole dish. Adding the tomatoes. And the cashew butter. You may need to stir the cashew butter as the oil tends to separate, but you're adding about roughly 2 tablespoons to thicken. And then the other ingredient we haven't talked about that we're using today for the first time is coconut milk. So coconut milk is what the other portion that makes this broth so creamy, so delicious, and kind of combines with that cashew butter to really just create like a delicious vegetarian style broth. So I'm going to add my vegetables. Be prepared. The salt and pepper. And then combine. And then really what we're doing now is just cooking the vegetables until they're cooked through in this broth, in this spicy, fragrant broth. You can see it's already kind of coating the vegetables. And we're going to put this on the back burner and we're just going to let this simmer. There's not a ton of liquid in here right now. If you feel like the liquid is a little short, you could add a touch of water just to steam. But first, I would say just steam it for a little while because the vegetables themselves will also express and produce some liquid. All right, so we're going to lid this, move it on, and move on to dish number 2, the dal. All right. Right, so the start of this dish is not too dissimilar. It has a little bit of different spices and herb mix. Slowly starting with the ghee again, the clarified butter. Again, if you don't have ghee, use vegetable oil. Won't affect the flavor much. This is just more traditional. We're starting with seeds again. We're starting with cumin seeds this time. Again, to kind of get them brown and fragrant. So very similar beginning. And you'll find a lot of Indian dishes start with this as some version of seeds or whole spices, and then cooked in with fragrant items like the onion, garlic, and ginger. So we're going to crank that for a minute. The red lentils that we're using, they will just about double in size. So in terms of swelling as they cook. So if you're adding, the recipe calls for 1 cup, it'll create a little over 2 cups of finished product, plus the other ingredients. So this dal also has lemon juice, so that's a little bit different. It's slightly more acidic. Once again, use your nose in the kitchen, use all your senses, and I can smell this cumin starting to develop. That smell is starting to fill the kitchen. They're turning a slightly darker brown color. So I'm going to go ahead and add the onion, with the dal. Green chilies. Also has coriander. Again, same delicious sizzle. You can see the fragrance. You should give this another couple of minutes, just like the other, until that onion has softened or turned clear. So you just don't want to get it too brown. If it browns a little, it's fine. You just don't want to blacken it. And we're also adding, oh, not bad. We're adding the garam masala, which is that red spice as well. I'm going to speed it up a little bit for the sake of time, and we're also going to work on the naan. I'll show you the naan because that's a really cool piece. So I'm going to add some tomato. I'm going to go ahead and add my lentils. I'm adding 1 cup. 1 cup of the red lentil or brown, your preference. Then I'm adding a liquid. I'm going to add about 1 cup of liquid to start. As you can see, it's quite dry, and those lentils will really soak up a lot. So I'm going to add about 1 cup of liquid, but you could always add more as it goes. So same thing, I'm going to now lid this. So there's our mixture. I would have cooked the onions a little longer if I had the time, but they'll still cook in the broth. Okay, so I'm lidding that. Put it on the back burner as well. I'm going to move on to the naan. So with the naan, you should not need to, I'm going to adjust to the pan here. You should not need to put any oil in the pan. If things are good, you're working at the right heat, kind of a medium high, and the naan itself is wet enough, the dough, then you should be able to just place it directly on the dry surface. However, you want to get it preheated and pretty hot before you set it there. So these naan, another way to do this, or another really tasty way, if you've had garlic naan, is you could take some of that minced garlic that we prepared earlier, and you could put a pot of butter on the stove or clarified butter and boil some garlic until it's kind of roasted. And that is a delicious piece that you could then brush or dip the naan in after. So that's what would be the equivalent of like a garlic naan, if that's your preference. So if all goes well, I'm going to put this here and we should see it start to puff up. And again, the heat of the pan is kind of everything here. It's not, you just got to find a regular steady heat. I would compare it to like cooking a pancake, a crepe, any other sort of like a fat flatbread is just finding the right heat and then just checking it pretty regularly. I just use my finger. You could use a tong like this just to check the bottom. And once we start to get like a nice golden brown to dark to middle brown, like a brownish color, then you should be ready to flip. And again, just imagine that in an ideal world, I would compare this to like a pizza crust too. If you've ever had a pizza crust that's out of like an 800-degree oven, it's a whole different experience. And that's kind of how some restaurants are able to make such a kind of light, crispy naan. But this is about as good as you can do in a home kitchen. So you got to work with the tools you have. So. I'm starting to see a little bit of light brown around the edge, so we're getting there. I'm feeling good about the heat. I'm starting to see a little bit of rise out of the center because, again, you have that double action of the yeast plus the baking powder that's helping to cause that rise. You might even see like blistering or like kind of like a popping and some bubbles start to appear. That is great too if you see a little bit of that. I'm going to go ahead and flip this now. In looking at it, I probably would have let it sit a little bit longer. The dough itself, I could have let it rest a little more. So I had like a little more lift. I'm getting a little bit of like lift and rise out of this, but I think ideally maybe you leave it a little bit longer until it's fully doubled in size in that bowl, and then you should get that kind of lift. You can see it's almost like smoking and curling around the edges, which is fine. Again, not too different from eating a pancake, but it often can develop like a little pocket of sorts in the center, so you can kind of like rip it open and you can open it up. Ideally, what they're designed for and what the naan is meant for is to dip and hold all the delicious sauces and other things that we've been making with the vegetable korma in our case and the dal. So it's kind of that sop up the sauce piece. Just open the dal. You can tell it's plenty hot when you open the pan, open the lid, and you inhale, and you get a little bit of a cough. It's getting there. So this is close. I'm gonna drop it. There you go. I like that. I like this dark brown. Even touch blackened depends on your preference, but a little bit of black is fine. So I'm going to turn this off. We're just going to cook one naan today, but you have 12. The recipe makes 12. So it is ideal that you would cook these like as close to the service time as possible. So again, a little bit of rise, got some bubbles happening in there. Nice browning on each side, and this becomes your dipping action. If you had that garlic butter that I mentioned, this would be the time. Brush a little bit of that on there and then serve that up. So I'm just going to plate up the whole dish right now. And then we'll meet back on the other table. Okay, so in the end here we have this delicious, I wish you could smell the smells in the kitchen right now, but I think some people are intimidated by Indian cooking, and I think can be a little bit challenging at first. But as you can see, some of the fundamental techniques, like the way that we, you know, onions, garlic, ginger, the way we use some of the assorted spices, your ability to create a dish that's as hot or as mild as you'd like some of those things are just kind of cooking principles that I think are quite simple. Oh, here's a little fresh cilantro, which could work really well on any of the dishes, just to give a little bit of freshness too. Cilantro is also used quite a bit along with the coriander in Indian cooking. So again, super healthy, very powerful, very full of flavor, and a great dish to cook to kind of mix it up. If your kind of regular weekly routine is you're stuck in a rut and you're doing mac and cheese and pizza and things like that, and you just need something else to excuse me, pardon me. I think it's just a great kind of weekday dish that, again, you could also, like I said, maybe at the beginning you just try one of the dishes. But I would definitely say try the naan, because naan, no matter who you're serving, I think naan is a winner because it's approachable and it's a pretty straightforward dish. So there it is. I will take any questions.
We got a looks delicious on your dish. But no questions.
Well, I guess I would ask the group who's on the call, and does this feel approachable to you? Do you anticipate any challenges? I will say I bought all the ingredients at King Supers. The spices can be a little expensive, so they're the kind of thing where it's an investment, right? You buy a bottle of spices that might be $6 or $7, but if you find a way to use it, or if you have a few dishes that you could use it in, then I think it pays for itself over time. And again, if you don't have one or the other, if you can't find garam masala, but you can find turmeric and mustard seeds, then go for it, right? You don't need the full palette of spices to make this thing. You can really, much like any other thing, you can improvise and make it work. I think onions, garlic, and ginger are hard to replace. But then I think in terms of the spices, you can kind of play a little bit. Turmeric, I think, is one of the most subtle of the spices that isn't going to overpower anything. It's just kind of an earthy undertone, but even just a touch, like the half teaspoon we use today, can go a long way in terms of like a deep, nice earthy flavor and that yellow color that's super vibrant.
Someone said that it is completely doable and that they're very excited to make the naan.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. Yeah, good luck with that. I think, yeah, just give yourself plenty of time and give yourself time for it to rise. And again, the recipe says 60 to 90 minutes. Sometimes baking recipes are a little vague, 60 to 90 minutes to rise. I'd say go more allow it to double fully in size, and then it should have like a light kind of buoyant feel by the time you punch it down, or by the time you put your hands on it, after it's risen. So and there are endless styles and types of naan. I mentioned this is a plain naan, or considered a plain naan. There's the garlic naan, which I mentioned. There's also like numerous other types of naan. You can stuff the naan. You can add flavor to the naan. You can, there's like many varieties of naan and many flavors that you could play with too. But if you have a sauce or a dish that's flavorful enough and has packed with flavor, then really you're using it just as an accompaniment or as like a plain side. So.
So we have a question asking, can you use whole wheat or a different kind of flour?
Yes, certainly. The whole wheat. So there is another Indian bread called paratha that is made with whole wheat flour. You could make naan with whole wheat. It would just be a little bit flatter. It may not rise as much. You could do half whole wheat, half white. That would probably be what I'd recommend, as opposed to 100% whole wheat with the naan. But you also could look up or make a recipe for paratha, which is all 100% whole wheat, a different Indian flatbread, often stuffed with potatoes or spice or different things. So that could be like yet another adventure in Indian flatbread. So. Can I make a quick plug for next week, just in case anyone's thinking of coming? I would hope that you could make it. It's going to be, I think, a really great class. We're doing a slew of recipes from the Gambia and Senegal, so West Africa. My friend Modu Jaita, who's a chef currently working in South Carolina, he used to be based here in Denver, um, is going to be joining us, and he's got like a wealth of knowledge about the foods of that area. And again, I think pretty approachable dishes that we've made. It'll be our first meat-based dish. We're doing a chicken yassa. We're doing a black-eyed pea fritter, like a fried bean fritter, and then also a stew, like a West African stew made with peanut butter as the thickening agent, like a peanut stew. Um, and I think it'll be a really good class, and he's really a wealth of knowledge. So hope you can join next week. And I just want to say thanks for your time today. I hope you enjoyed it and appreciate it. And I really enjoyed the chance to work with you. And I'm glad you're coming. And please continue to attend and let your friends know. We're still accepting people. And if anyone wants to sign up or get involved, we're still open. So look forward to seeing you, I hope, next week.
Thank you for that. And I hope you have a lovely rest of your evening, and we'll see you next week if you can join us. And if not, the classes are recorded, so they'll be available afterwards as well.
Take care. Have a great night.